Yeah.
All right. So this topic is a heavy one, and I think so. We're
Well, we've
gonna,
already talked about 9/11,
yeah,
so
it can't get much heavier than that, um,
no, no.
and racism. Um,
Yeah,
so we're gonna talk about sexual assault. That's what we're gonna talk about.
good.
Yeah, I know. What better than two white men to discuss sexual assault? But I've
To in fact
truncated
to in fact educate you
to
on sexual
educate.
assault, to
Yeah,
mansplain you, okay?
to man. That's literally it. Yeah.
So
If
listen.
so, listen up, folks. Um, so the video, if you're listening on the podcast, don't worry, you'll still be able to understand everything. You don't have to watch the video on screen with us, but the video was like 20 minutes long. I truncated it to about 6 minutes, where they cover two or three questions. The way it works is unlike last week, where we talked about where we had this couple, right? That
Hmm.
went through and we kind of saw their relationship and whatnot, or their past relationship. Well, this is called middle ground. So this is where they have three people that are for this particular topic and three people that are against this particular topic. And then they debate, or they discuss with one another. And this is discussing the Me Too movement. So that's what we're gonna listen to now, and we're gonna interject. Kyle, just let me know if you want me to pause at particular
If
points.
you're on any kind
All
of
right.
social media, I am sure you've seen the hashtag #MeToo.
Okay, so just going to pause here because they've got some written stuff. The Me Too movement was founded by Tarana Burke in 2006 to help survivors of sexual violence, particularly young women of color, find pathways to healing.
Women are using two words on social media to identify themselves as survivors.
The movement gained a widespread attention. Don't worry, I'm not going to have to do this the whole time. Widespread attention in 2017 when high profile women began speaking out about their experiences.
Survivors of sexual harassment and assault.
If I were to say Me Too, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Good intentions, bad ramifications.
When I hear the term Me Too, I think of some people that have been rightfully taken down. I also think of some people that have been wrongfully canceled.
A lot of men are confused about what it really means, and they take it as sort of like an anti-men thing or like an attack on men, when it's really definitely not.
Okay, so now before we get into like the specific questions I end up asking, what are your first impressions of the Me Too movement?
My first impressions were, I think overall they were good because it encouraged people to speak out against injustices that were happening, had happened, currently happening to them, without ramifications of losing a job or some sort of, like in the 80s, probably if you worked in an office on Wall Street or something like that. If someone like came by and slapped your ass or something, like, it probably didn't go to HR even. It was probably just like, that's just guys being guys, and like,
Right.
I'll just go home, and yeah, it sucks, but it is what it is. And now it's like, it doesn't, it's not that way anymore. And you're not going to be, shamed or made to feel bad for speaking out about it. That was my initial thing. And I mean, it hasn't really changed much from that. But, I think the way in which it has evolved, if it has evolved, it's when you look at specific cases now where maybe some people are posting things without evidence just on Twitter, and people immediately taking that as fact and saying that person's done forever without a fair trial or without anybody taking their side of the story seriously at all.
Yeah.
So it becomes a little bit one-sided in certain cases. But overall, I think it really did a lot of good for women um, who felt like they just didn't have a voice in that regard,
Yeah.
especially in the workplace. I think that was what I saw it was good at.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel it was a necessity. It's a good thing it's
Yeah.
around. Okay. So this is the first question, and then these people are going to be debating.
The Me Too movement is a witch hunt.
Okay, so now for the people that are just listening, all three, like three people and three people, they're both in two different groups. Again, one is against, one is pro, one is for. And now when they say that, when the director says, hey, in this case, the Me Too movement is a witch hunt, then they have to decide if they believe that. If they do, then they walk to the chairs that are in front of them. And then they discuss it just with the people that first walked up, and then all of them discuss it afterwards. Okay, and just real quick again, the definition for a witch hunt is, according to these video producers, is an attempt to find and punish people whose opinions are not popular. Okay, again, an attempt to find and punish people whose opinions are not popular.
Yeah, I feel like every good intention in the world in the beginning, but I feel like it's spiraled a bit, and there's been some people that have been sort of wrongfully canceled, as we say. Aziz Ansari comes to mind, who was canceled for not basically reading the mind of the woman who withdrew consent after having sex with him. I feel like people shouldn't be collateral damage, and rape accusations really destroy someone's life.
It's a paradigm now where you have men as the universal perpetrator and women as the universal victim. That's for me what it's become. And I just think it's hugely problematic. And I mean, how can you vilify like half the population?
Men are not even allowed to be a part of this dialogue. A lot of men are abused in corporations. So it isn't just about women, it is about the abuse of power.
Can I have my disagreeers come join the conversation?
I have a big issue with the term witch hunt. It feels like a very convenient political term to sort of distance ourselves from what's really happening in the Me Too movement. So
what would you term it as then?
I think it's a movement to examine the power structures and the very real ways that people are falling victim to predation that is upheld by a criminal justice system that allows it to continue to be the case.
But I think that there is a similarity when you consider the fact that many people who support the hashtag and the movement, they really do set aside due process, which is really what happened to women during the actual witch hunts. I think that a lot of times when you see hashtags like believe all women, believe women, and there's no nuance, and that just has to be the case.
But when we get into, you're not saying believe some women, or you're not saying not all men, that we're not really getting at the core of the issue, which is the abuse. And it's not saying like men are all bad or anything like that, but it is saying that maybe we should examine the people who are in power. And since most of those people in power are men, then perhaps we should examine the dynamics and gender and everything like that.
I fear.
Okay, so that was that first question. Again, I had to splice certain aspects. It's funny that I actually sort of agree with both sides. I mean, one, I support the Me Too movement. Two, I think that the pro Me Too movement, like that one woman was focused a little too much on the definition of witch hunt. I do think that the Me Too movement is a witch hunt, but that's not a bad thing. I think that's a great thing. That's the powerful aspect of it, that you're trying to hunt, quote unquote, hunt, usually men. Well, actually, let's be real. It's pretty much only men. When we're talking about specifically the Me Too movement, not that men can't be sexually assaulted, but the Me Too movement is surrounding women, as we saw by the definition at the beginning. So I do think that it's a justified witch hunt, that it makes sense that having this witch hunt is a necessity, like I said before. So I don't consider that to be a negative, but I think you even mentioned this at the outset, that I agree with some of the other women that were on the anti side, saying that, yeah, it very much is. There are situations where there's this cancel culture of like, oh, this person was accused, therefore we cancel them. And you were talking about, what was Brian Callen was his name?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So he's, as far as I know, he's innocent, but he lost everything, or at least all of his employment. So, I mean, clearly it's damaged his life quite a bit just by somebody just opening their mouth and saying, hey, I was sexually assaulted, which may, at least with me not knowing anything, the assumption that I'm going with is that that was not the case, or at least there's no proof. At least there's no proof that that's the case. So the idea of innocent until proven guilty, I mean, just like in public opinion, that just seems to never pan out. It's like people just go with their emotions and they don't take a step back to examine what reality is. But the Me Too movement as a whole makes complete sense. And I do think that men should be held accountable. I think that a lot of things that we've kind of perpetuated over decades of time, what's acceptable. I mean, you gave an example of like what might be acceptable in the 80s, right? Like that's never really been acceptable. Just women just never have had a platform by which that they can actually call out these actions and say, hey, that's incredibly fucked up. And now that they do, I didn't really enjoy that guy's explanation of his quick point about saying that men also go through stuff. I mean, okay, I mean, I agree. Like, yeah, men go through stuff, but like men get taken seriously, or maybe not with sexual assault. I will say probably not as much with sexual assault, because in male culture, it's very much like, what, a girl like grabbed you? Like, dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's hashtag high five.
Yeah, exactly. So it is different. So I understand that aspect, but I think men struggle with a lot less of that being suppressed than women do. So I think he's missing the point that Me Too is specifically to raise women up to a point where they are equal with men and where they can actually be heard. So in that regard, I disagree with his point, but overall, it's kind of a mixture between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely. Yeah, I can definitely see both sides, and I think that's, my take on a good amount of things is, especially today, is like, I can see where this side's coming from, and I can also see where this side is coming from. And, with the side that is anti, when we talked about people being canceled based on just a simple accusation, I think you have a huge push now from, because the media really blows these things out of control and kind of dictates and gives platform to these things, and allows these situations to spiral out of control on a more massive global, like, magnifying glass on the particular situation. And then if you have sponsors, if you work for a corporation, if you work for, if you're on a TV show or whatever, this is especially in Hollywood, then you're done. And the reason why you're seeing Joe Rogan and Joey Diaz and all these comedians leaving LA is because they're like, we don't need LA anymore you don't need LA to be famous anymore. Right. It used to be you go to LA and you become an actor, you become someone. Now you can do that from your own home. I mean, they've established themselves that way in LA, but now they're like looking around and they're like, it's just, I want to be in control of everything. And I can do that. I actually don't need LA or someone looking over my shoulder, or if one thing comes out about something I did 30 years ago, I'm not going to get canceled. I'm just going to move on and let people online argue about it. And people in real life don't give a shit. So I don't know. That's probably way off topic, but that's just more like the ramifications of when it can go to extreme on the negative side. And that's very unfortunate because you're then taking away from credible stories from women who have really been done wrong, you know? And I think that's majority of the stories, but the smaller ones where it's like, wow, you've actually made something up to ruin somebody's career because you just don't like them. Those get blown up sometimes even bigger. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah. And nothing happens to those people.
No, nothing.
That's the crazy part.
It only happens to the person they accuse. Even when we know it's false, they can't get any work. That's why everybody's just like, I'm just doing a Patreon now. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. So 2020 has been wild for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on.
I fear false accusation.
So that's the topic we were just touching on, but they're going to touch on it a lot more.
All right.
I fear false accusations.
I am a big proponent of equality with women. I don't want to be, because I'm on the anti-Me Too side here, classified as a misogynist. I believe that the Me Too movement has swung way too far, and a lot of men that I know are deeply concerned about, and I refer to the Harvard Business Review study that just came out 3 months ago that suggested that 58% of men are deeply concerned about being falsely accused. That's changed my behavior in my life. I will no longer date somebody in my industry. What's going to happen in 6 months or in a year from now when we've had a great relationship and it comes to its natural course of end and something happens where she's got this idea in her head that I did something to wrong her? All she needs to say is, he sexually assaulted me, he did something, and then it's he said, she said, and I lose my job, I lose my income, I can no longer support my boys.
That does not happen.
It absolutely happens.
It does not happen.
It happens every single day.
No, mostly
can't just pretend it
people are
doesn't
pushed off.
happen, though.
Okay, it could happen.
I think that you're talking about, well, men are scared now to, be alone or whatever, and I think that's really just like men finally being held accountable or maybe not even held accountable, just like be aware of the space that you're taking up and your actions. So yeah, we're talking about false accusations, and I've been falsely accused of sexual assault, and absolutely nothing has happened to me. My reputation is not ruined. I can get a job, I can go to school because I didn't sexually assault anyone.
With all due respect, you're at a much different place in your life than other people who have careers, who have jobs, who have families. You're a college student, and you are not at a place right now where you're carrying those responsibilities.
But I think like, why are you, if you know you're a good dude and you don't inappropriately touch women, like what?
He doesn't know the women are good women.
So for the past 30 years, I've been working in corporations, and I've worked with a lot of phenomenal, incredible, dynamic, powerful women. Maybe 10 years ago, I was going on business trips and we were having dinners and, people are having drinks and things can happen. I'm not suggesting that anything inappropriate happened. But today, that would not be something that I would entertain. It's not about me being uncomfortable. It is that 58% of men, that's 60% almost of men today say that they are uncomfortable being in a business relationship with a woman where they cannot be on a one-to-one. And that is impacting women in their ability to progress in corporations. And I don't want to see that.
I fear false accusations because when we actually look at what a false accusation is, it's an incomplete accusation.
Or it's a lie. It can be a lie too.
Or it's an accusation where the police were unable to obtain all necessary information in order to pursue whatever truth was there. You're right, there could be a small percentage of lies in there, but we also can't get blinded by what we think or want to think a false accusation is because it's politically convenient, because we want to, make it sound like, well, it's your responsibility to ensure your economic future, so, take it as a serious threat that I don't want to be with women in a space because of what's happening. I feel like all of us are talking about real harm, real harm. And so it's sad that we talk about false accusations and we start throwing all these distractions out there when there's real harm that we could probably all be really good at solving together.
Okay, so that's the end. I just wanted to go through two segments of this thing. I will say that one guy citing the Harvard study, or Harvard Review, or whatever you want to call it, saying that men are uncomfortable, that honestly, that doesn't mean anything to me, because that doesn't actually separate men that try and do things correctly, and they feel uncomfortable. That doesn't separate them from the men who would love to keep the status quo, and therefore they are uncomfortable. Those are all put together into one lump sum. So, you don't know what percentage of those men are people that should be held accountable. So the fact that they are uncomfortable is exactly the point. I mean, that's literally the point of the Me Too movement. Then the other guy steps in and also says something that I find kind of ironic, is he said, well, if you're a good man, then you have nothing to worry about. And I find that comical because that's what conservatives use, that exact same point about being stopped by the police. If you've done nothing wrong, then you don't have to worry about it. But yet people still get shot. People still get killed for literally just existing, just being in that place, in that spot with that person. In this situation, talking about men and women. In other situations, you're talking about minorities and police officers. And I find it funny that a person who I would imagine, and I'm certainly speculating, but I imagine a person who is more liberal leaning in this situation is using the exact same argument that's also bullshit for conservatives, in police brutality situations. So I find that comical. But yeah, the point that, and then the one woman said, but that doesn't happen, talking about false accusations, which is just, I mean, that's so, you really I'm just going to leave it pretty tame. You have to educate yourself a little bit more on that if you genuinely believe that doesn't happen.
That's just the thing about being so on one side of any argument, is that you're blind to the possibility that you could be wrong.
Right.
Or that there's any leeway at all with your stance on what you're believing in currently. And yeah, that's why it's good to look at stuff like this, and good for them to talk to one another and get different opinions, because before that, I mean, it seems like they were only talking to people who fortified and, were in unison with what they believed in. And they're like,
that's a good
oh my
point.
God, there's people who believe that this is wrong, or that this is actually a good thing. Like, what?
Yeah.
Let me find out why. And that's good that they did that. And, maybe some of them walked away and they're like, maybe I shouldn't be too militant on my position. And maybe I should consider, the possibility that they could be right on X, Y, and Z, but I still don't agree with them on these other things too. So that's just more of what needs to happen around things like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, police brutality, these hot button issues that it's just like, you have to be with us or you're dead. Or you're just an asshole, or you're done. And it's like, I just would rather fully understand the entirety of the situation before I just emotionally jump to one side,
Yeah.
And that's what people are doing with politics as well, and really with everything. But yeah, when the Me Too movement first happened, I think probably every guy just kind of was like, man, in my life, were there moments where I was, guilty of, nothing crazy, but you try to think back to times where you're like, man, was I too pushy in this scenario, or was I too disrespectful, dismissive to a woman, not just in like a sexual way, but, you know, just in conversation or at work or something like that. It really caused me to reflect and look at different situations that I've been in my life and just be like, I don't know. Not saying that I was, but I'm just saying, like, you definitely, for the first time, stopped and you can kind of look back on your own life. And I think that's a positive that it brought, is like self-reflection. And then, what could you do going forward to, not necessarily live in fear. I don't feel like I need to live in fear, but I want to be respectful to women in every situation. And, maybe I wasn't before, or as much as I could have been potentially, but I'm certainly not going to be like scared, because I don't know. There's just there's a lot of different angles you can look at this from.
Yeah. Yeah. No matter what, though, false accusations do occur. We've talked about them on the podcast. And that doesn't at all mean that the Me Too movement should be shut down or anything like that. I think for the most part, the Me Too movement has been fantastic. And I'll say it again, it's been a necessity, a necessary good that's come of this. But you can't have blinders on about everything. Like you can't also just ignore the minority of situations that are unfair, that people get accused and they didn't do anything and then their whole life is ruined. I mean, that kind of stuff sticks with people. It certainly sticks with that person probably for the rest of their life. And it might even impact their relationships with other people. To have somebody have their character questioned like that. I mean, maybe their friends might think back or might, I don't know. You would hope not. I mean, you would hope that your friends and your family would be pretty confident in what they assess as who you are. And hopefully they wouldn't believe in that accusation, but you also never know. But I mean, when it comes to like businesses or sponsorships, kind of what you were alluding to earlier, a lot of people are trying to become a lot more independent because they don't want to deal with the cancel culture, the potential that they say something. I imagine that's especially true for like comedians, which we've talked about a few comedians now that have had sexual assault allegations, and one of them ended up which is so remarkably hard. A matter of fact, I'll throw in the name Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber also had a sexual assault allegation, and he had proof. He had receipts showing that he was not at the location that he was being accused. And the same with the Chris D'Elia situation. And again, like if anybody has more information on this, that I'm getting something wrong, feel free to correct me. But this is all based off of my understanding of these situations, that these people had ended up proving that they were not guilty of this. Like they weren't even around. There was no possibility that they could have done it. And it's absolutely stunning that criminal charges aren't then processed, especially like maybe you have it, you can't prove it one way or another, right? So you say, okay, well, if you can't prove it one way or another, there's going to be no criminal charges across the board. But if a man then does prove, hey, I didn't do this and I have proof, here's proof, then I think it's up to it should be criminally charged. It should be then turned around so that you push people away that are that just say that because of, I think you mentioned this, that they just don't like that person, or they were rejected by that person, or whatever it might be, that you have some sort of repercussion so that people are dissuaded from just randomly blurting things out like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, there's got to be, there's punishment for someone, like Harvey Weinstein,
Mm.
and for good reason,
Yeah,
obviously.
rightly so.
But if you're making these accusations against someone who's completely innocent of those crimes, there has to be some sort of repercussion for your action and your how you negatively impacted their life in that particular time frame, and probably until the rest of time if they're a very, important or influential celebrity in particular.